Right, let's talk about Canada. Yes, Canada. Our usually placid, overly polite northern neighbor. Famous for maple syrup, Mounties, and apologizing for everything. Well, it seems they've finally decided to stop apologizing. Specifically, British Columbia, or BC, has decided to play hardball. They've introduced the Economic Stabilization Tariff Response Act. This isn't just any old legislation, it's a political hand grenade. Unveiled in early March 2025. Picture the scene. The British Columbia Legislative Assembly, probably after a hearty breakfast, were presented with this bill. Introduced by Deputy Premier Nikki Sharma, Premier David Eby had already signaled this was coming. He basically said, if you poke the Canadian bear, expect to get significantly inconvenienced. This act is BC's way of preparing for a potential economic scuffle with their giant neighbor to the south. The core idea of this act is simple, yet rather punchy. It gives British Columbia the power to levy tolls, fees, or other charges on vehicles. And not just any vehicles, mind you. We're talking about those traveling between the contiguous United States, the lower 48 as they call it, and Alaska. Now let's turn our attention to the source of this international indigestion, President Donald Trump. It seems his approach to diplomacy remains, shall we say, robustly unconventional. In the period leading up to BC's legislative bombshell, Mr. Trump had been particularly vocal about Canada. And by vocal I mean he was making threats that would make a Bond villain blush. We're talking about serious economic strong-arming, the kind that makes international trade agreements weep quietly in a corner. This wasn't just a casual remark. It was a sustained barrage of America First rhetoric aimed squarely at its northern ally. One of the headline-grabbing threats involved tariffs. Specifically, President Trump mused quite publicly about slapping a hefty 25% tariff on certain Canadian imports. This wasn't just a minor trade adjustment, it was a declaration of intent, a move that could trigger a full-blown trade war. Canadian industries from timber to toffees were suddenly looking over their shoulders. The message from Washington was clear: play by our rules or face the economic consequences. It's the diplomatic equivalent of my way or the highway, only the highway might soon have tolls. This cocktail of aggressive posturing directly spurred British Columbia into action. So, what exactly is in this Economic Stabilization Tariff Response Act? Is British Columbia planning to build a giant wall and make Alaska pay for it? Not quite, but the implications are certainly significant. The legislation, introduced by Deputy Premier Nikki Sharma in the grand halls of the British Columbia Legislative Assembly in Victoria, is designed as a flexible, yet powerful tool. It doesn't automatically impose tolls. Rather, it grants the provincial government the authority to do so if they deem it necessary. Think of it as a big red button, currently under a glass case labeled "Break in case of extreme American belligerence." The bill specifically targets vehicles, including all important commercial traffic, that use BC's infrastructure to travel between the lower 48 states and Alaska. This includes the province's highways, which are vital arteries for goods moving north, and its coastal ferry system, which provides another crucial link. If enacted, these tolls could add a significant cost layer to an already expensive journey. The legislation is carefully worded, giving BC the power to set tolls, fees, or other charges. This means they have options, from a per-truck fee to more complex charging mechanisms, all designed to make a point and potentially recoup any damages from U.S. tariffs. Unsurprisingly, the news of British Columbia's potential toll roads to Alaska didn't go down well in, well, Alaska. Imagine being told that the main routes supplying your state might suddenly become more expensive due to a political spat you're only indirectly involved in. Alaskan politicians, particularly those in Washington, D.C., were quick to voice their displeasure. Leading the charge was Republican U.S. Senator Dan Sullivan, who didn't just express concern. He threatened swift economic retaliation against British Columbia. It seems the art of the diplomatic counter-threat is alive and well. Senator Sullivan's proposed countermeasure was quite specific and targeted a major source of revenue for British Columbia, the cruise ship industry. He suggested waiving a long-standing piece of U.S. federal law, the Passenger Vessel Services Act, PVSA. This law, in essence, requires foreign-registered cruise ships sailing between two U.S. ports, like Seattle in Washington state and various Alaskan ports, to make at least one stop in a foreign port. Section 5. The domino effect. When politics hits your wallet and your groceries. The potential economic impact of these dueling threats is, to put it mildly, rather alarming. For Alaska, the prospect of tolls on goods traveling through British Columbia is a serious concern. Given its geographical isolation, Alaska relies heavily on these Canadian land routes for the transport of everything from fresh produce to construction materials. Any increase in transportation costs due to tolls would inevitably be passed on to consumers and businesses. This means Alaskans could face higher prices for everyday necessities, squeezing household budgets and potentially impacting the state's overall economic health. It's a logistical nightmare in the making. Beyond the direct cost of tolls, the broader US-Canada trade tensions, already stoked by President Trump's earlier tariff pronouncements, create an environment of uncertainty. Businesses on both sides of the border thrive on predictability. When that predictability is replaced by the threat of sudden tariffs or retaliatory fees, investment decisions are delayed, supply chains are disrupted, and economic growth can stall. Section 6. Sorry, not sorry. Canadian voices in the crossfire. So, what do ordinary Canadians make of all this high-stakes political maneuvering? Well, it's complicated. There's a definite sense of frustration and perhaps a touch of weariness, with the aggressive stance coming from south of the border. The constant barrage of tariff threats and, let's not forget, the rather outlandish talk of annexation, hasn't exactly endeared President Trump to his Canadian neighbors. Many Canadians feel their country is being unfairly targeted by a protectionist agenda that disregards decades of mutually beneficial partnership. It's like being repeatedly poked by a much larger, louder neighbor who then acts surprised when you finally poke back. However, alongside this frustration, there's also a deep-seated desire among many Canadians to maintain friendly relations with ordinary Americans, particularly those in neighboring states like Alaska. They distinguish between the political leadership and the people. This sentiment was beautifully captured by individuals like Carmen Gustafson and Ghislaine de la Plante from Whitehorse, Yukon, who participated in a cross-border ski event in Alaska around the time these tensions were peaking. They explicitly voiced their exasperation with U.S. policies, but stressed the importance of friendship and unity with their Alaskan counterparts. Section 7. Alaskan Anxieties: Life on the Front Line. Now let's hop over the border, or perhaps drive very carefully towards it, and consider the perspective of Alaskans. For the residents of the last frontier, this escalating dispute is not some distant political drama, it's a direct threat to their way of life and their state's economy. Alaska's unique geography means it's heavily reliant on supply routes that pass through British Columbia. Whether it's the Alaska Highway carrying essential goods or ferries connecting coastal communities, BC is an unavoidable part of Alaska's lifeline to the lower 48 states. The thought of these routes being subject to new tolls is understandably causing considerable anxiety. Imagine being an Alaskan business owner trying to manage inventory and pricing. Suddenly, you're faced with the possibility of significantly higher transportation costs for virtually everything you sell or use. This uncertainty makes planning incredibly difficult. Will the price of groceries skyrocket? Will construction projects become prohibitively expensive? Section 8. Of Skis and Solidarity: Finding Unity When Leaders Squabble. Despite the high-level political chest-thumping and the ominous sound of tariff threats, it's crucial to remember that international relations aren't just about governments. They're also about people. And sometimes when politicians are busy drawing lines in the sand, ordinary citizens are busy crossing them, often on skis. A perfect example of this grassroots unity emerged in March 2025, right when the tension between BC and the US was ramping up. The Buckwheat International Ski Classic, an event held on the Klondike Highway near Haines, Alaska, became an unlikely symbol of cross-border camaraderie. This wasn't just a small local gathering. Nearly 70% of the roughly 270 participants in the Ski Classic were Canadian, many traveling from the neighboring Yukon Territory. Think about that. At a time when their provincial government was preparing economic countermeasures against U.S. policies, and when a significant portion of their fellow citizens were boycotting U.S. travel, these Canadians chose to cross the border, participate in an American event, and share a day of sport and community with their Alaskan neighbors. Section 9. The Longest Undefended Argument: What next for US-Canada relations? Where does this leave the historically chummy relationship between the United States and Canada? British Columbia's Economic Stabilization Act is now on the books, set to expire in May 2027. Is it an effective deterrent or an escalatory move? The truth is, it's probably a bit of both. The next chapter is still being written, likely with sternly worded diplomatic notes. The immediate future involves a tense waiting game. Will President Trump call BC's bluff, or find another target for his tariff ire? Will Senator Sullivan succeed in rerouting cruise ships, or will wiser heads prevail? Deputy Premier Nikki Sharma emphasizes the BC bill supports interprovincial cooperation. This hints at a broader Canadian resolve, even if it means weathering an economic storm. The legislation is a tool. Its effectiveness depends on how it's wielded.